record it, and I want to have a live audience, and you're the live audience. And there's stuff too that I want to do. And so it's useful, I think, to have students, interaction with students on these things.
Okay.
At least I'm going to try that. And so if you're willing to do that, be part of this project.
Okay.
I'll give you a release form tomorrow, just to say that it's okay for you to be on film.
Okay.
You won't ever notice it. There are microphones here. They pick up whatever you do. There are cameras there, and there are cameras there. One or two cameras there, and two cameras back there. Those cameras will be on me, and these cameras will be on you guys. We have a technician. Just saw him. His name is Kyle. Hi, Kyle.
I guess he can hear us, huh? Yeah.
Hello, how's everybody?
We're great. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome.
Good to have you with us, Ross. He's my engineer, you know, Fraser. So it's sort of look, I'm a little nervous. It's sort of a starting off period. You know, you get I've done videotaping of couples interacting who are fighting with each other, and you know, I know that once you first minute or two, you're fine. You forget that they're there. So hopefully you'll forget that they're there. But if you're willing to do that, I'll bring the forms tomorrow and you can just sign them off.
Yeah.
The benefit of this is that I will get my lecture every day, and so at various points in time, I'll upload those. So if you miss something, you can always go back over the lecture if you wanted to, in preparation for exams and that type of thing. Although I want you to be here for the lectures, okay? Yeah, any questions about that?
Oh, I saw you had like PowerPoints. Do you upload those too?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so we could like take notes on it.
Right. So what I'm going to do today, you'll get a little bit of this. I'm going to sometimes say, Kyle, let's go. All right. So today I'm going to do 2 segments. And so the start and the end of the segments, I'll actually make a note of it. And then the rest of it will just flow. We'll generally take a break roughly halfway through each day for 5 minutes or so. Okay. What else? So I'll go over the first part today. I'm going to go over the course. I'll go through the syllabus. I'll talk about the website, the Canvas site. And then in the second part, we'll do the introductory lecture. Okay?
Okay.
Andrea and Alex.
Yep.
Okay, great. Cool.
Jeez. Yeah.
Okay.
Hello, guys, turned off.
Okay, the first thing we're going to do is just sort of go over the course content and show you the Canvas website that we'll be using with this course. For today, I'll make some notes about the online course when it gets offered. So those of you who will be on the online course in the future, you'll know where to find that content as well. But most of the content is the same. So the course website is on Canvas, and this is what's called the home page. And it's got just a little introduction here, and it's got some tabs on this side. Have you both used Canvas? Yeah, probably. What you're going to find is on the home page, I have a Word document with the file on it, with the syllabus on it. And I also have a link to the course syllabus tab, which has the course schedule on it. So let's quickly look just at the course syllabus so I can give you an overview of the course.
Is this activated on Canvas? Because I checked yesterday. And
Yes.
It wasn't. Okay.
And it was activated this afternoon,
Okay.
this morning.
Perfect.
All of the details of the course are indicated at the top. My name and office hours, how to reach me by email, and where my office is on campus. And then the first section is the purpose and goals of the course. So the purpose is to provide you with insights into the functioning of families as systems and the dynamics of interactions that take place in those family systems. So like if you've had one of my other family courses, either Family and Society or Global Families, we didn't really talk about the family as a system as much as we talked about the family as an institution. And I'll make that distinction when I talk about the first lecture later on. But this is the family as a system. So we're looking at families in one place. Primarily, most of the research comes from the United States, although the kinds of models we're going to learn about can be used to analyze families anywhere because they don't have specifics tied to a particular cultural group. And so we're going to look at families as systems. In the first third, we'll explore how families can be conceptualized and analyzed as living, self-regulating systems. So families, we're going to look at families as having a life of their own. Right? You're all in families, you know what families are like. Sometimes you say, well, why does my family do that? It just kind of goes that way, right? Well, because it's a living system. It has a certain vitality to it. It has a certain direction to it. It develops patterns which become regulating of everybody's behavior in the system. And so it kind of moves forward. It always tries to keep itself alive. It always tries to survive. And to survive, it has to do certain things to make sure that it can do so, that it can adapt to its environments, and that it can achieve its goals. And so we consider them not just living, but self-regulating. Families are constantly monitoring themselves. Members monitor each other. Oftentimes there's an executive subsystem that monitors the rest of the family. You usually see that as the parents, etc., right? And so that's what we're going to talk about. How do we think about a family as a system? What does that mean? What are the certain elements and dimensions of a family as a system? In the second third, we'll explore ways that families cope and adapt to stressor events in their environments. So once we learn about the family as a system, and we'll have some models that people have come up with which define how families attain goals and adapt. And then we'll move on and we'll talk about, well, the family doesn't always work perfectly. Sometimes things happen that can disrupt the family. A child might be born with a disability. A flood might happen, or an earthquake, right? Or a landslide in Oso, for example. So how do families, when they encounter those kinds of things, how do they adapt? What causes some of them to survive and even get better as systems, and what causes some of them to fall apart or have trouble and difficulties? And so the middle part, we'll talk about what's called the family stress perspective and look at family stress and adaptation. And then in the final third, we'll explore the ecological context of families and how that affects the functioning and adaptation strategies and look at the impacts of specific internal and external stressors on family functioning. So in the third part, we take what's called the ecological perspective. And we say, well, we've analyzed the family as a system, how it operates under normal conditions, how it deals with stressors when it encounters them. And now, we don't think that all families operate under the same set of parameters, that sometimes families, say in poverty, can't operate the same as a family that is in middle class, right? And so different kinds of environments make certain kinds of family outcomes possible or less possible, and therefore dictate that families have to reorganize themselves in different ways. And that helps us understand why families are different. And so we'll look at the ecological perspective because that focuses attention on those dynamics, how the ecological context impacts families and the ways they're structured and how they function. Then part of this will end up with talking about families under particular kinds of stressor events. Now look at the research. Actually, your paper that you're going to do a library research paper, and you're going to analyze some of the research on a particular kind of stressor event, and you get to choose which ones you want. And that paper will be due the beginning of the last week of classes, and the last week of classes I will actually then lecture on some specific kinds of internal and external stressor events and how families are affected and how they adapt. So we'll look at things like, some of the possibilities are things like families of police officers. You would think that they would be different, wouldn't you? Because police work is stressful in particular ways. It's demanding on the police officer, has to manage his or her life in a particular way in order to survive at work, literally survive at work. What are the implications of that for the family life of that officer? Or families of military personnel, right? It's usually impacted by periods of deployment and reunification, for example. Violent occupations in which people get shot and killed, right, or maimed. So these kinds of things put certain pressures on families that are unique. And so we want to look at some of those. We'll look at a little bit about how a disabled child, having a disabled child impacts family dynamics, or what are the demands of that child and how that puts pressure on the family system and results in certain particular kinds of strategies being employed in the family organization that makes those families different. We can look at adult illness, so what happens when an adult of the family, one of the parents specifically, say has a heart attack or comes down with cancer. How does the family adjust to that kind of situation? And then we will also look at things like the impacts of historical events such as natural disasters, terrorism, wars, those kinds of things impact families as well. So in the last third of the course, I'll pick a couple of these, or three of these things to focus in on, and I'll lecture on those. And you're going to actually do a paper on one of those. So you'll be able to reflect on it. So the ones I choose are probably going to be based on the papers that you guys write. Okay? So you'll all have done some of the readings. All right. By the end of the course, you should be able to identify the components of a family system and the methods of their assessment, classify families using different systems models. We'll learn 3 different system models. Identify points of similarity and difference among different family systems models. Evaluate the validity of family systems models based on empirical research. Identify the components of family systems that make them more or less resilient to stress or to stressors. Understand and apply principles and concepts of the ecological perspective, and know some current research on how different types of stressors impact marital and family interaction. So that's the focus of our course. Okay? So hopefully you'll enjoy it and you'll find it interesting. There's a lot of theory, and a lot of it's abstract because it's easy for us to talk about a family like what's a family? Two parents and children or something like that. It's a little bit more complex and a little bit more abstract when we want to think of, well, how well defined are the parents as a subsystem within that unit? And so we're talking about things you can't really touch. You can only understand by watching the ways in which the members interact with each other. And that then creates these patterns. And those are the patterns that we want to talk about. The course format and organization is a mixture of lectures, and I'll do lectures in here, and then if you're in the online course, you'll have access to these lectures, and those will be posted. There'll be 2 films that we'll watch. One called Crooklyn, which is by Spike Lee. It's about a family in Brooklyn, New York, a black family, and the kinds of environments that they're dealing with. And it's a nice big family. It's got lots of dynamics in it that we can then use to apply the models that we're going to be learning about and try to diagnose and figure out what's happening in this family. The other one is called Ordinary People, which was an older movie, and that one is about a family that's undergoing a tremendous stressor. The oldest son has died in a drowning accident. And so they're trying to deal with all the implications of that. So that would be a good one for thinking about the family stress model and what are the things that make these families, make it difficult for these families to adapt, and what makes it successful, not successful in adapting. In-class discussions and independent library research paper, you're expected to complete assigned readings prior to the time scheduled and make a contribution to discussion. So the readings are listed in the syllabus, and they're all available on Canvas. So there's no required text for this course. You can get all of it off of Canvas. I see big smiles. I know. Basically, because it's kind of a unique course, these courses aren't offered in large numbers around the country. It's really for people in schools where they have a really well-defined family, what's called family science department. And those often lead into family therapy or family counseling kinds of programs at the graduate level. So you're going to get a kind of an interesting perspective here. So there's no real big textbook that I can use. My only choice is a graduate level tome, which would cost $300, or taking a chapter here and there. And I actually chosen some good ones, so I think you'll enjoy them. They're not hard to read, but they're not textbook either. So, course requirements. Your grade will be based on 3 online exams covering lecture, reading material, and any other in-class presentations, 3 reading response assignments, 2 family analysis papers based on viewing of movies, and a final library research project. Sounds like a lot, but it's not really. I think you're going to find like the analysis papers are they should be kind of fun to do. It's not like you have to go research a whole lot of stuff. You basically take what you learned and try to apply it to what you saw in the movies. And so you generate a paper pretty quickly with it because they're very descriptive. All exams will be a mixture of multiple choice, true, false, and short essays based on the readings and class lectures and the presentations. Study guide will be posted the week before and can be found under the syllabus calendar entry titled Begin Exam Prep. So when we get to the Canvas website, I'll show you how to get the study guides. Each exam is worth 40 points and will cover material since the previous exam. So the final is not cumulative. Total 120 out of 300 points come from the 3 exams. Okay. Now, have you had online exams before? Have you? You haven't and you have?
I have.
Okay, so there'll be a multiple choice part and then there'll be probably an essay part. And I like to, sometimes I give 2 chances and I might do that or I might just make it 1 and then make adjustments to the score. Depends, we'll see how it goes. Because I'm not going to have as many questions developed for this, as I'm going to need for the online class. So there'll be a limited number of questions because there's only a limited number of students. So usually I have to make a question bank for every topic. And so that it randomly pulls questions and I'm probably not going to be able to do that as easily or as quickly. It's going to take a while. So since there's so few students, I'll just, for this term, probably have 1 question per thing, okay? And then there'll be some essays, short essays. Okay. 3 reading response assignments involving 3 to 4 page summary of one of the readings assigned for the class session. These assignments type, double space, 1-inch margins, 12-point font. So just, in your Word, use Word. Okay. And then you're expected to bring summary with you and be prepared to discuss the readings you summarize in each class. Each of the assignments is due before noontime on the date listed and is worth 10 points for a total of 30. So these are little assignments that just get you to read some things that I want to be able to talk about in class and get you involved a little bit instead of just sitting there and listening to lectures. Okay. You'll submit these online and I'll show you how to do that. 2 family analysis papers involving the application of family systems knowledge to a case study of the families depicted in 2 movies, Crooklyn and Ordinary People. These essays, again, typed, double-spaced, etc. I'm figuring about 8 to 12 pages is what it's going to take to finish it off, because you're going to be talking about this aspect of the system and this aspect of the system, etc. So by the time you're done describing what happened in the movie that shows this dynamic or this aspect of family system dynamics, you're going to be 8 to 12 pages probably. Okay. They will be worth 50 points each. So this is a pretty easy 100 out of 300 points to get. Just have to do a pretty thorough job. There's not always a right or wrong answer. There's a more thorough and a less thorough approach, and that's really going to be the foundation for how they get graded. Okay. So if you do a really thorough job and you cover all the concepts and you make a good effort explaining how something that you saw in the movie shows this dynamic, then you're going to get the points. Okay. And then we will, when you come to class, the day it's due, our class is going to be a discussion of what happened in the movie. And we'll talk about every single aspect of the film. It'll be a whole 2-hour discussion. Okay. Then your library research project involves an investigation to family function in face of one of 8 possible stressor events. And you get to choose child with mental illness or disability, child physical illness, disability, adult mental illness, disability, adult physical illness, disability, stressful work environments, military families, stressful work environments, police families, economic stressors, particularly unemployment or house foreclosures, how that affects family dynamics, or natural disasters such as floods, hurricanes, droughts, earthquakes, etc. So there's a whole literature. I believe there's enough studies in each of these areas to constitute enough for writing a paper. Some of the like natural disasters, you might have to move, some are on floods, some on hurricanes, some on earthquakes. I used to have it such that it was family and police families, military and police families, but I actually think there's enough just for police families and there's enough just for military families, and they're different enough that I've made them separate topics, okay? If there's something else you want to do that you think would be interesting, I'm willing to also consider it. And just let me know and I'll try to see what's out there before send you in that direction. Because I want you to come out with a paper that's a good paper, so I want to make sure there's something there. Okay. To help you prepare for the paper, the focus of the project, I call it a project rather than a paper because I want you to think of yourselves as advisors. So you're either helping out FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency that helps people in hurricanes and floods and et cetera. So, the director of FEMA wants to know, how can I better serve the families that find themselves being subjected to a flood or a hurricane? So that's how, if you were to take natural disasters, that would be your focus. Okay? If your focus is on police families, imagine you're consulting with the chief of police in Seattle. What would you write to them? Write a report. Here's what I found out about what's unique about police work that is challenging for families. How families are impacted by these things. What do we know from the research on police families? And given that I'm now, by this time, an expert in family systems and family stress analysis, here's what I would suggest you do to better serve those families. Okay? Might be something to do with the work environment, or it might be something to do to provide counseling in a particular area that you're specific about, or it might be a policy that you enact that maybe changes the ways in which police officers relate to each other, or manage their work environments such that it doesn't impact the families the way it's been shown to in a negative way. So you get to kind of be an advisor. Okay. To help you prepare, 3 preliminary assignments involve selecting a topic, doing a search of the literature, and the first involves just picking a topic. So the first assignment, you'll get 2 points just for coming up with 2 things that you want to research. As long as you do it on time. The second is a list of references with abstracts for 10 articles and or books that you think you'd be useful in your paper. And I want a good number of them to actually be studies. Because it's not very good to just talk about, well, theoretically, this is what. No, you want to be able to say, no, we have research that shows this. Okay? So you need to have some good, solid research. It needs to be in peer-reviewed journal articles, professional research. Okay? Not something from Time Magazine. And then the third will be a little bit later, and once you get feedback from me, from the second assignment, I'll look at what you came up with for your articles, and I'll say, okay, this one looks really good, or you need a few more, and I'll try to help you find better articles if you need them. And then the third preliminary assignment is, okay, here's the ones I'm going to use, and here's how I see my paper developing. I'm going to use these articles to discuss this. I'm going to use those articles to discuss this. And then the final is to produce the paper. So you go get those articles, read them, write up your analysis, and submit it. Okay. So the other 2 preliminaries are 4 points each. So in total, there'll be 10 points from these preliminary assignments. That says 20, it should say 10. And then the final paper is 7 to 12 pages in length, typed double-spaced, 1-inch 12-point font. You're expected to save your paper in PDF file format and submit it electronically on Canvas on the due date. It's worth 40 points. So total, the paper comes out to 50, 40 for the actual paper and 10 for all the preliminary stuff, work that you do developing your references. I do it this way because this way I don't get papers in which And you go off and you do all this hard work and you're going in a totally wrong direction, and you're not going to have anything there that's going to allow me to give you a good grade, right? Because your grade is going to be based upon how well, some of it is based upon how well you represent and summarize that research, but a big hunk of it is also going to be how well you use course material to make sense of that research. And if you're going in the wrong direction, you're going to be lost. So this just helps you make sure that you have a good set of foundations for your paper. So 3 10-point reading responses, 2 analysis papers, preliminary research assignments, exams, 3 of them, and then the final paper. So there's 300 points total. Your final grade's a percentage. Right? So standard 93 or above is an A, 90 to 93 is an A minus, etc. Okay. If anyone in the course has, please read the academic dishonesty and plagiarism. Make sure that you cite things properly when you write them. Particularly, this will be an issue in the summaries, the reading responses, and will be an issue in the final paper. Yes?
Do you want these in ASA or in...
They can be in either ASA or APA format.
Okay.
Okay? They must be in one or the other.
Okay.
Are you familiar with ASA, APA formats? One or the other? Okay, good. And I've had students in the past submit their final paper without a list of references at the end because they, well, I always gave the references. No, I want the references listed again in the final paper, but without the abstracts. In the previous 2 assignments, it'll be the paper, the reference with the abstracts for each one, so that I can read what it's about before so I can give you feedback on it. But in the final paper, once we've decided what those references are going to be, reference you actually use in the paper should be at the end in APA or ASA format. The class schedule is shown in this Word file as well. So today, course introductions and families as systems. And then tomorrow, the next time we'll talk about the systems perspective, what that means. Because there's something unique about the systems perspective that if you're, are you social majors?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So in SOC, we tend to have a variables approach. We tend to say, well, what's the cause? X causes Y. The systems approach is a little bit more holistic. Well, it is holistic. It's a little bit more touchy-feely. It's a bit more amorphous because it doesn't see one thing affecting another. It sees a whole set of things moving together in an interactional dynamic that you miss if you try to say, well, what's the cause of X causes Y? And so we got to talk a little bit at length about that, and we'll do that at in the next one. And there's readings here on this side. So Broderick is the first reading. Hochschild, 1989. We're going to use this as an example when we talk about the systems perspective. And then we'll have a discussion on the next session, what's normal or functioning, and that's going to be based on a reading by Walsh. And it's basically, you say, oh, I grew up in a functional family or dysfunctional family? You ever debate that with your siblings or other people? Oh, no, our family's so dysfunctional. You hear that all the time, right? Oh, that's such a dysfunctional family. What does that mean? And we're going to talk a little bit about that. What's normal? What's functional, and are these terms even viable? And what are going to be the criteria that we use to define normality or functionality? And so we'll have a discussion about that. And then we'll move into the first family systems models, which are focused on goal attainment. So these family system models all talk about what makes a good family, or what makes a functional family in some sense. Some of them answer the question according to a criteria of, okay, a functional family is one that achieves its goals most efficiently. And so there's a couple of models which the primary focus is on what kinds of family organization and dynamics allows families to best achieve their goals efficiently. Other models focus on, no, it's not what makes you be able to achieve your goals, it's what makes you able to adapt when you're threatened. So these family adaptation models, their focus is, okay, there's lots of different kinds of families, and they organize themselves in all kinds of unique ways. Some of them are more efficient at attaining their goals, some are less efficient. But is that bad that they're less efficient? Why should we set the criteria at efficiency? What we should be setting the criteria at is, well, regardless of how they're organized, are they able to adapt when things threaten them? And so the key is going to be what characteristics allow families to adapt, what allows them to sort of shift and jive, if you will, when they encounter obstacles along the way. And so those will be the adaptation models. Then we'll talk about family measurement. How do we measure family systems? And then we'll have a movie, Crooklyn. And at this point, this movie, I will show it in class, unless I can get it so that I can show it online. And if I can show it online, then you won't have to come to class. You can just watch it at home and do the assignment based upon it. And so these are the readings for each of these. Research assignment 2, literature search 1. So this is your first literature search assignment. That gives me time to give you feedback the following week and time for the next one. Then the next week, week 3, in the summer course here, we'll have a discussion about what you wrote, what you found in the movie. And that's when that first analysis is due. Then we have a review and makeup day. So we'll talk about more, any questions you have about these models. And if there's something that I forgot in a lecture that I wanted to elaborate more on for the purposes of the online course, then I'll take advantage of that day to do it then. Then we have the exam. Then we move on to the next segment, which will start with family culture and functioning. We'll look at how religion plays a role in families and the importance of religion. And we'll talk about some key concepts in the second, family culture and functioning, family integrity and family ritual, and how families' cultures are comprised and how culture plays a role in adaptation. Then we'll get into the family stress and coping model, and then we'll have the movie Ordinary People. We'll apply that model. We have a research assignment 3. Then we move on to our discussion of the family stress and coping model. And then we have an exam 2. Then finally, we move on and talk about the ecological perspective. I'll do a lecture on it, and then we'll have a discussion of some of the articles. You won't have to review all of these. I'll assign it to different students with different sets of articles. These are actually studies of families that are really well done studies that take into effect the ways, the kind of neighborhood variables that change how families work or don't work. Like one of them looks at, does spanking a child work as a disciplinary technique? Well, it depends on the environment. The answer to that question. You can't just say, no, spanking never works. It might sometimes. Another one looks at, well, are families able to organize themselves in a way that overcomes the difficulties of a very poor environment? If you grow up in a family that lives in a neighborhood with lots of porn shops and lots of gun play on the streets and gangs and things of that nature, are you going to be able to shield your children and successfully achieve socialization goals in that context? Or does the context just make it really impossible for you to do that? And so some of these articles are about those kinds of topics. And so that we'll discuss those in this one. And then finally, we'll talk about the impacts of economic and work environments, individual disabilities and illnesses, and historical events before we get to exam day. That's the whole course. It'll fly by, right? Okay. I'm pretty flexible, let me know what your needs are. There's some things that I can't be too flexible about. In particular, these things that lead to discussions. I really need you to have done those by the due dates, okay? And like I said, I'm willing to help you as much as I can with your research process. I'm pretty good at the literature, and I can help you with searching strategies so you can get a good paper, okay? And so that's the syllabus. Any questions about that? No? All right. So this is the website. The announcements will appear here. And these, you probably have them set up to go to your email or text messages or whatever. So whenever I make an announcement, I'll put it here. If I change something, I'll put the announcement there. The assignments are all here. And I'll probably reorganize these a bit, but right now they're all just all listed under assignments. I probably should organize them under reading response assignments, research assignments, and other. So I'll try to do that as well, but you can always get to them here. So here's the reading response. Assignment 1, it's due on Thursday by 12 p.m. Points 10, you're going to upload a PDF file. Do you know how to save a PDF file in Word?
You can just like change it in the bottom, right?
Yeah, where does it save as a PDF, okay? The reason I have you do it in PDF is because I use Turnitin, which compares what you wrote to what anybody wrote anywhere in the world who's using Canvas. Any other student, any other paper writing company, any source, Wikipedia, it compares it to everything written and looks for contiguous strings of words that are the same, and it highlights where you may think about whether this is plagiarism or not. So you get a report on that when you turn it in. And if you see the percentage, if it's kind of high, you might want to go, ooh, if it's like 20% or more, you say, maybe I better go look and see where lots of times it's innocent and it's not an issue of citation issues that you need to worry about. But if it's extensive, if you're up to 50%, then you probably want to think about how you wrote it and put in some citations at least, okay? Because you're expected to do your own words. So the reading response, read the chapter by Walsh, and if you click on this, it will take you right there. And you can read it. And answer the following response prompt. What are the 4 types of normality discussed by Walsh and how do they differ? What do you think defines a functional versus a dysfunctional family system based upon what you're reading Walsh? Okay. And then to submit, you just say submit assignment. You don't know how to do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some people might know it though. So, and then you just browse, you find the file that you saved, and then don't forget to submit the assignment. Let me see, let me just put something there. Well, it has to be a PDF file. Forgot about that. Won't let you submit it unless it's a PDF file. This assignment submission is my own original work. I attest to that. And you get turned in, a check mark, submission details. Here's your download, submission details if you click there. Right now you have nothing there. Because you don't get a Turnitin score. When you want to check on your file, let me go back here. For some of the things I'm going to give you feedback on, in particular your reference lists. And when you do your reference lists, I will give you feedback so that when you click on that file, you'll see what you did originally, but you'll also see my comments. And so you'll have that feedback directly. That's how I'll give feedback to you. Okay, so that's the assignments. Discussions, we don't have any. Grades, your grades are here. So this is where you get you'll find, I think you'll find the annotated file in here. People, don't pages, files, these things don't even use. If I can disable them, I will, because you don't need them. And there's some other materials, like in the files, I have some files maybe from an earlier time when I did the course that might not be applicable to this course. So you never have to go there to find anything. Okay? Everything that you need will be available on the calendar or on the syllabus tabs, so you don't have to worry about those things. Okay. Syllabus is here, and so you can follow the course along here, the days and dates, and there are two different kinds of things in here. One is events, and so an event is a lecture, which I'll give to you, or will be a recorded lecture if it's the online version. And intro and overview, that's just what I'm talking to you about today. So it's just telling you what we're going to talk about each day. And then there are assignments that are here as well. So you see the due dates for assignments. And so you can follow the whole course through here. If you click on any one of these, it takes you, so if I click on this, it takes me to the calendar. And the calendar is for every course that you're in that has a Canvas site, right? Have you used the calendar before, maybe? So you'll see, you click on which ones you want. I think the default is all of them, but you'll see this course over in the corner. And then you'll see an entry for what you clicked on, intro and overview. That's today, Tuesday the 24th. And if you click on this one, this is the lecture. So today's lecture, here's the reading. You click on that, it'll take you to the PDF file. And you click on this and you'll get the PowerPoint file. Okay? And then for those in the online course, there'll also be a third entry here which will say the lecture recording. And that will then have a link, a YouTube link, to access the recording of the lecture so that you can watch it to follow and complete the course. Okay. So you can choose to follow along in the course either by using the syllabus tab and clicking on the items there, or you can just every day just go to the calendar. You know, you say, okay, what have I got this week? Here are the things. Let me look at these. What do I have to print off if I'm going to use? If I'm going to, you know, I encourage people to print the overheads and then take the notes on the overheads. I think that's a very useful technique. I usually do print them 2 per page. And then you have these little A's. These are assignments. So you can click on those when you're ready to submit them. Okay. The only assignment that you don't have to upload a PDF file for is the first one, which is submit the topics here. So if you click, if it's an assignment page, you can get to the assignment directly just by clicking on the title. Submit a list of 2 alternatives. And if you want to submit an assignment, you just type in the 2. Number 1 is the one you really want the most. Number 2 is your second choice. If you want to add a third that you say, well, and I really would thinking that this is something that's not on the list, but could I do it on this? And tell me why and what it is that you want to do it on. Give me some details and I'll consider that. Okay? And then submit your assignment here. Oh, I gotta put something in here. And again, if you did it right, it'll say turned in, right? And this brings you back to the home, to the assignments page. So, and that's the website. Any questions? I think that's everything. Let me show you again the so here, July 31st is an exam on July 9th. So on July 3rd, there's an entry exam 1 prep. Click on that. And here's the information. Here's the study guide. Right now, those aren't exactly this. I have to double check them because I reorganized the course a little bit, but that's where they'll be by that date. So you'll have the study guide about 4 or 5 days before the exam. And I never put anything on my exam unless it's on the study guide. Okay? So if it's not on the study guide, you don't have to worry about it. Unfortunately, everything I talk about is on the study guide. So. But if I happen to leave something off, no problem. All right, so there's the course in a nutshell. There might be some, I might take some advantage of either chat or conferences. If I do that, I will give you an announcement of how to do that. Probably not for the live class, but for the online class, to help me converse with you and talk about topics. We'll probably go do some of these conferences or chats. So, good. Anything else? No? Good. Okay, let's take a break.
Okay.
All right?
Sounds good.
How's it going, Kyle?
He's falling asleep.
They think you're falling asleep. No? Oh, your thing's up. Okay, about 5. Let's start about 5 till.
Yeah. You have that Miller Markets open?
The one right upstairs. It's like, yeah.
I want to get.
I went to the atrium before.
I'm not walking over. Want to say? I want to say good.
Oh my gosh, I was just gonna say on Thursdays I have to leave like 10 minutes early.
And I'm like,
I'll hold down the fort, but on Thursdays I have to leave.
other than that, I'll keep you. Okay. I'm gonna go track down and see if I can find some coffee because. Alright, well it is blue skies galore outside. So I'm like, awesome. That's so great. I have to go to work after this. I don't enjoy anything.
Where do you work?
I work at the Slow Pitch over Meridian. It's like a casino, restaurant, bar kind of thing.
yeah, I know what you're talking about.
It's like 5 to 2. So
5 to 2 in the morning. That sucks.
yeah.
Why would you do that?
Yeah. Because I make a buttload of money. And I have class at 9 a.m. tomorrow, so we'll see how this goes. And I have to travel tomorrow. Hey.
So are you like a waitress there, or do you?
Waitress, bartender kind of thing. Do we not have a garbage in this entire room?
Yeah.
Oh, it's behind the chair. Yeah, I kind of do it all. pretty much. Yeah. And then,
I heard you have Bellingham Fitness in the kids' room.
oh, jealous! Oh my gosh, that would be so awesome.
It is sometimes. Like, my hours aren't bad. Like, I don't
Have to work till. Is Bellingham Fitness 24 hours?
No, which kind of sucks because sometimes I'll like get done doing my homework and I'll be like, I just need to go run this off or something, and then like nothing goes.
And I'm like, I refuse to run at night here. I like run outside and I went on these trails. So I live over in the Leonard Streets.
Okay.
And there's like some trails that like go over there. Went down there one morning, like a Saturday morning at like 8 in the morning. Hobo galore. And I was like, I can bring pepper spray. Oh my god.
Oh god.
So don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't go running at night because who knows who's hiding down there.
Yeah, seriously.
But yeah.
I'm gonna have to relook over the syllabus and see like when everything's due and like what he exactly wants for
I
me.
feel really bad because like those discussions, I'm like, that's like the main ones that he wants us here for, and I'm like, I'm really sorry I didn't pick a wedding day.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully I think it'll work out. He seems really like.
Yeah, I think it'll really quick. I'll turn it in. I just won't be here for that one day. I'm really sorry.
Yeah, I was emailing him earlier because I was trying to get into the online course because I was in an online course of his, and I was like, I'm working, I'm going to school, like I'm trying to get into the military, like I need to like take this online course to like make it easy on myself, and I just couldn't like get in or something, and so.
So they have an online course of this one right now as well?
I think so. It was either this or it was like one that he taught.
Okay.
And a different subject. But yeah, I was just like during finals week I was like trying to figure this all out, and I was like, no.
I know.
And he's like, I'm sorry, I can't do anything for you.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah, and I was like, it's okay.
I'll just come to class 2 hours for 4 days a week, don't mind me.
Yeah, because I go to class from 8:30 to 9:50, and then I have this like break, so it's like,
I mean, I was trying to take a class like in between my other class and this class, because my other class is over at 11.
yeah, it's like,
And they like Woodring was like, yeah, no, we're not gonna offer it. I was like, cool.
that, and like on Thursdays, so on Thursdays I go to class and I work from 10 to 1, and then I come here and then I go back to work from 4 to 7. So it's like I like feel bad, but I have to leave early or else I'm not gonna get to my
Yeah.
on time.
Sorry.
It's only Thursdays.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it'll be fine 10 minutes and
Yeah, that's what I do.
that'll be recorded. Kyle, don't tell him any of this. But yeah, I think it will be fine. I don't think that would be a big deal. It's not like, hey, I'm just not gonna come.
Yeah, no.
See you later. I'm kind of unexcited that it's a small class, but I'm also kind of like weirded out. I don't know what to do with my face when he's looking at me. I'm like,
Like I always look like this. I seriously, like I always just like.
yeah, I'm like sitting and I'm like this. I'm like, I gotta stop. There's only 2 people I can look at. I can't look out of it.
And sometimes like like when I say stuff, I don't think it through sometimes. So if I say something, I'm like, it like sounds good, but like it doesn't come out good.
I'm like, we're gonna be on recorded.
People are gonna,
oh boy.
people are gonna hear how stupid I can.
Yeah, I feel like that's gonna come out now and then.
It's fine.
Luckily they won't like know our names, so they can't like track us down and be like, you're stupid. Like, oh thanks.
I'm always stupid sometimes. I don't have time to think about it.
Yeah, when you're like in like a discussion and you're like, "Bah," you're like, that's not what I'm gonna say.
Yeah.
That's not no.
No, that's not me.
Or like if you have an idea and it like comes to you and you like blurt it out, but it gets all jumbled up and you're
You're like trying to like, you know what I'm saying, and everyone's
Yeah.
like, no, you don't. And I'm like,
come on.
I can't.
Or like someone's like, yeah, I get it, and it's completely opposite. You're like, no, nope, that's nowhere near what
They
it is.
try to restate what you just said, but it's not what you
To show they're like good listening, and you're like,
No.
you don't get me. Stop.
You don't get my
We're not on
love.
the same page here. But I'm really excited about the paper. That sounds like,
I'm excited that we actually get to pick our own topic. Like,
yeah, I'm like, I have 3 that I'm like, crap, I don't know what to choose.
I know.
And that never happens.
Yeah. In my last class, I didn't get a pick. Like the one that was 22 pages long. Like it was so rough because it was like on religion and conflict, and I was like, ah.
What did you end up writing it on?
Religion and conflict.
Oh, so it was just like about
It was
like the
like-
whole history of it, or was it
No,
like?
I wrote it about how like for religion to survive there needs to be conflict, and so I took that view of it. I have a nice one on my paper, but
Nice.
yeah, she was like nobody wants to take that view, and I'm like,
Yeah, because it was really hard.
I was like no.
Oh yeah. Like no thanks. I really wish they had like free printing.
Okay, is this working, Kyle? We're good? Okay. Okay, our first lecture is on families as systems. So when we say, what do we mean when we say the family is a system? Before getting there, we have to think about what is a family. And we have to make a distinction between thinking of the family as a system versus other ways of thinking about the family. And so when we say what is a family, we can think of, well, how do you define it? And there's two kinds of definitions that we could come up. One is what we might call an institutional definition, and the other is what we'd call an analytical definition. And they're both, in the sense that they're definitions, they're both constructions of a sort. Like, there is nothing that's in reality a family, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything is a construction. It's the way that humans make sense of what's in their world. And so there's two kinds of groups that we're concerned about when we think about the family definition as a construction. One is, we might call it the family as a social construction, which is how a society thinks about what a family is and how it creates family in its day-to-day life. And we'd call that the institutional definition of a family. And the other is how social scientists think about a family. And so that's a group of people who are part of a scientific discipline who are interested in answering certain kinds of questions about groups. And so they construct an idea of what it is, the subject matter that they study. Okay? And we're going to be more concerned about the latter than the former. But to kind of give you a little bit more background on the two types, let's look first at what an institutional definition is. An institutional definition is based on the realities of everyday life as shaped by individuals in the same society trying to survive and adapt to their environments. So you live in a particular society at a particular point in time. There's certain environmental conditions of life that you have to adapt to. You have certain tools available, certain technologies that make it possible, some things more or less possible to do. And that then changes the way you organize your day-to-day life. If you, for example, if you're farming, if you don't have massive corporate farms and a private marketplace, well, you can spend most of your day tilling fields and planting and harvesting, etc., and it's going to be labor intensive, etc. And so you're going to create a family system that's different than a family in an industrial society where you don't have to farm your own goods. You're going off to work in a separate place rather than working in around your house where their farms are, etc. And so you're going to change the way you operate in your day-to-day life. And so that's going to essentially define how you construct your families. Now, there's certain of these things are, these technologies available in the kinds of environments we're adapting to make certain kinds of forms of family more or less likely to occur, but we also have other dynamics that change what that family looks like. For example, who has power in the society. They're going to want to shape the family in a particular way as well to their advantage. So for example, in most societies, we have patriarchal family organizations. Men kind of make all the decisions. Well, why? Well, because at some point in time, men gained power over women in society, and this allowed them then, when new conditions changed, they were able to influence the adaptation in a way that they got all the good stuff, and the people without the power, namely women and children, got all the kind of crummy stuff, all the leftovers that didn't yield more power. And so that sustained their position and their privilege in society. So different aspects of our day-to-day life, both the kinds of environments and technologies we have to use to adapt to our environments, and the power structures of the society are going to shape what families look like at any particular time in any particular place. And so as we kind of work this through, interacting with people, as women interact with men and they find that they don't have the ability to get the men to do the things that they don't want to do, they wind up doing those things, and the men go do those other things, and gradually you get these patterns that everybody is finding this is the reality. All these women are finding the same reality because power is structured in societies, right? And so as all these women start doing the same thing and all these men do these different things, that's a pattern. And that becomes reality. And so when young children are born and they're raised within that society, they don't have to figure it out for themselves. It's already presented to them as this is how it works. And so they fall into the same pattern. And it only changes usually only changes if the conditions of life change, like the Industrial Revolution, for example. And so that changes the conditions of life, which then make it possible for the individuals in the society to alter the ways in which they organize themselves in families and change the nature of family life. And so as individuals develop patterns of action and reaction towards each other, these patterns become expectations and take on the characteristics of reality for those living them out. And so not only do you think that this is reality, but you kind of expect that if you're the man, you're going to do these things, and if you're the woman, you're going to do these things. That's just gender, right? Or if you're the firstborn, here's the things you do, and here's your expectations, and here's where you're going in life. If you're the latter-borns, and you do these other things. And so people, as they develop the new patterns, they then develop expectations that reinforce the patterns, so that then the expectations aren't just for each other's, for the other person's behaviors to conform with the pattern, but we actually use those same expectations for ourselves. How should I expect myself to act? And that's the basis for our actions going forward. So these institutional definitions are very variable from society to society. What's a family in an agricultural society is a lot different than what's a family in an industrial society. Just as one example. Different from a hunting and gathering society. What's a family in Mexico is different than what's a family in the United States. Different places in the United States will define the family differently. Lots depending upon how they've worked out these arrangements over time, given their environments, their technologies, and the power structures that exist within them. So they're not very useful for social scientists to say, well, this is a functional family. A functional family is anything that looks like this, has this structure, and operates along these guidelines. Who says, well, maybe in a different society, it's a functional family is something different. So if we wanted to come up with an idea of what makes a family work as a system, these definitions aren't very useful. They're useful for understanding how societies are organized, but they're not useful to understanding what kinds of internal dynamics makes families more functional or less. And so we're not going to use them. They are not the subject matter of this course. So that's all I'm going to talk about institutional definitions. We're going to drop it by the wayside. We're going to try to think of families in a more abstract way, regardless of whether it's in this society or that society, whether it's extended or nuclear, or whether it's polygamous or monogamous, it doesn't matter to us. We're going to say, if a family, what are the principles that make a family work, regardless of how it's structured in a society? Okay? And though that's going to then require an analytical definition. So analytical definitions are based on the needs of sociologists to distinguish one type of group from another and to help identify important aspects of group dynamics that explain group functioning and survival. So what's a family from a sociological perspective? Well, a family is a multi-generational group. That's kind of important because it says that when we act in our families, we're thinking about either some other generation that's going to come along as children, and as when we act in our families, we're going to have to deal with the influences of a previous generation. That's always going to be there, and that's unique to families. Other groups don't have that. Families are unique in the sense that they don't accomplish just one kind of thing. They don't attempt, for example, they don't just do some instrumental thing, like accomplish work, right? So a study group is not a family because it just does one thing. It helps people prepare to take a test. It really isn't designed to help people deal with their emotional lives or develop their identities in the world. Well, families do both of these kinds of things. They do instrumental kinds of things, and they also do emotional kinds of things, which makes them more complex and more difficult to operate as groups, right? Because when you want to achieve something, you can't just think of getting the tasks done efficiently. Because sometimes getting the task done efficiently means you have to step on somebody's toes, right? Someone's going to get emotional. And you can't just, at work, the boss can say, if you can't put the emotions aside, you're out of here. Family can't say that. Families are responsible also for the emotional sides of life. And so the ways in which they operate are going to be different than the ways in which any other group operates. And so this emotional and instrumental functionality of families is also distinguishing. And then the third thing that distinguishes them, and these aren't on the overheads, a third thing that distinguishes them is this idea that they have a history, that they have a duration to them and a high level of interdependence. Families exist over time. The members are tied to each other with an implicit and sometimes explicit understanding that this is going to go on into the future and that there will be responsibilities that go on into the future, that you can't just be easily cut off. Right? Now you can cut off, but that's a real drastic kind of thing because families have the expectation of duration. They also have very high levels of interdependency. People organize their lives in relationship to other family members. And one family member can't do something without impacting the other family members in many, many different ways. And so that high level of interdependency also makes them unique from other kinds of groups. Having said that, for our purposes, when we look at the family as a system, we're going to focus on three dimensions of that system. One is, the first component is the functional component. So we think of families as having a purpose and goals that define their existence and shape their activities. So families are trying to accomplish something. And the two things, there's two general groups of things they're trying to accomplish. One is dealing with the emotional needs of their members and dealing with accomplishing certain kinds of tasks, instrumental tasks. Those tasks might be related to the needs of the members, like we want our child to achieve success in the world. And so we're going to socialize that child to succeed in the world. Right? Or we might want to get a new house. So how are we going to organize ourselves to make money and save money in a way and allocate our resources in a way that allows us to save money to buy a house or a new car or a washing machine? Those are instrumental kinds of goals. They're things that we want. That's usually we decide amongst ourselves is what we want to achieve. Some of these instrumental goals come from society. So society says, well, you're a family, you have to do that. You have to make sure that your child learns the rules of society. So sometimes the instrumental goals are dictated by the society. They're not voluntarily created by the members. Make sense? Emotionally, most of that is the needs of members. So most of those goals are coming internally. The second component is the structural component. And this refers to established and repeated patterns of behavior that often become reified in sets of mutually agreed upon expectations. Reified, made real. We come to think of it, this is what we're about. So every family develops its own patterns. Yeah, there'll be some commonality for families in the same situation, in the same society, but there'll also be innovations. Right? And so what are those patterns of behavior? You think of your own families. Think about the ways in which you interact with your other family members. Do you see any patterning to that over time? Do you see that, whenever you're with this person, you do these kinds of things? Or you don't do these kinds of things? How much do you talk to your mother versus your father? What kinds of things do you talk about with your mother versus your father or your siblings, right? And so those are patterns. If I only talk about certain kinds of things with mom and not those kinds of things with dad, that's a pattern. My behavior is predictable, right? Ultimately, when we say there's a pattern, we're saying the behaviors are predictable. We know what's going to happen. As those patterns develop, they actually become in our heads expectations. Having problems with money, I better go talk to dad, because he expects that I should ask him about money. Okay? And so those expectations come about. Sometimes we learn them, but most of the time we develop them, and then we give meaning to them. And then third is the cultural components. Systems of meanings and identities that develop as group members try to make sense of their day-to-day lives and their patterns of interaction. What are we about as a family? We might be a dysfunctional family. That might be our thing. We're a freestyle family. We're a military, rigid family. We can think of ourselves and we can actually come up with reasons why we organize ourselves that way. We do it because we're very religious and we follow the principles of God or whatever. And so we give meaning to who we are and what we're about. And that's the cultural element of family life. And it's kind of an important one. Sometimes we do things that have no relationship to achieving anything. We simply do them because they sustain our family meanings, make us feel like we are a family. We might be going through difficult times and everybody's going in different directions. But you know what? Every single day we sit down together at the dinner table for supper. And when we sit there in a particular location relative to the other members. And we pass the food a particular way. Right? We might even play with our food in particular ways. Right? I always remember when I was broccoli, we'd always sit there as kids and we'd stick the broccoli in the mashed potatoes to make forests. A crazy kind of thing. We did every time we had mashed potatoes and broccoli. And we looked at each other doing it and we joked about it and it was fun. It was ritualized. Or we prayed every day before we ate. Okay? And there was one person that did the prayer. Or we were in a family in which the prayer got sent around in a particular pattern. What did that accomplish? What did that accomplish? Probably nothing in terms of achieving a particular goal, other than maybe making us all feel like we're together, we're a unit. And that sense of being a unit with a particular identity oftentimes is important in holding a family together when things get difficult. Oftentimes when families get into difficult problems, they fall back on those rituals. And so that's the cultural element. And we'll talk about that later in a later part in the course when we talk about cultures of families. Also part of the cultural is our own individual identities in that family. So who am I in my family? I'm different than who I am in this classroom. I'm different than just being someone's son or someone's brother. I was just home visiting my mom and my sisters back in New Hampshire. I get back there, I'm Ricky. I'm kind of like still little Ricky. I'm 60 years old. I'm still kind of little Ricky. Right? I can't shake that. I'm still mom's favorite. I'm not her favorite. Well, maybe I am. I don't know why. But that's my identity. And when I go back there, sometimes you don't want to go back. Because you might be somebody different. And when you go back there, you're that person again. Unless you can negotiate it. And it's really hard. That's why lots of people, when they go back home for holidays, holidays can be very stressful because these people have been away and they've developed a different identity. And then they come back into their family and they get sucked right into being that person that was the last person that was there before they left. And that can be really stressful. It can be really hard to shape that. It's probably when you go off to school, when you go off to college and you go back and visit old friends from college, or you go to a reunion 30 years later, or a high school reunion or something. It feels weird, right? Because you had an identity in that context. Well, imagine that you have this identity all the time in this family context, because the family keeps on going on and on and on, and you're always interacting with them. All right, so that's what we mean by the cultural component. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each here. Functional components of families. First, the first principle here is that families regulate interactions to achieve goals. Okay? Families function for something. And the thing they function for is achieving goals. Now, there are different kinds of goals. Some of those are constructed based on cultural values and mutual interests. We want to buy a house. Society says we need to make sure our children learn the rules and grow up to be functioning adults, take their part in society, be good citizens, etc. Achieve an educational degree. Those are constructed goals. They're specific to the society in which we live, or even the social group within which we live. So some families, a very strong goal is to make sure their kids get a college education. Other families could care less about whether they get a college education. Want them to get a job, find a spouse, get married. Whatever that goal is, it differs from family to family. The other kind of goal are what we call systemic. And these are things that families have to do in order to continue to exist. So they're like what sustains their vitality as a unit. We can think of these systemic goals as what keeps a cell, a biological cell, alive. What allows it to survive. What makes your lung work, your lungs work, what's necessary. Think of the family the same way. Family's an organism. What does it need in order to survive? So not just what does it need to achieve the goals that it sets for itself, but what does it need to just survive and adapt to situations that it encounters. Families accomplish tasks derived from their goals. So if you have certain goals, then you set up certain tasks that have to be achieved along the way to attain those goals. Systems theorists distinguish between what they call first-order tasks and second-order tasks. The first-order tasks have mostly to do with achieving goals. The second-order tasks have more to do with adaptation. So first-order tasks are related to ongoing activities to achieve goals. Some of them that are more around constructed goals are coordinated activities to effectively and efficiently attain outcomes. So let's say one of your constructed goals is to make sure your son fits in at school and achieves on the athletic field because you believe that athletics is good or whatever. That's one of your goals. So how do we organize ourselves so Johnny or Janie can achieve in soccer? Okay, well, soccer, you got to go to practice. You got to go to practice. That means you're probably going to have to reorganize dinner time. You're probably going to have to change bedtimes and when people do homework and things of that nature. So you have to organize yourselves so that you can make it possible for Johnny to achieve. My neighbor where I live here in my Bellingham home here, they have a daughter who is an ice skater and a skier, competitive. She's 12 years old. They're gone all the time. Oftentimes, one parent is there and the other one's off with the daughter, taking you to a ski competition or skating practice some far distance away for long periods of time. Those kinds of families have to reorganize themselves in order to make it possible for their daughter to achieve and to maximize her talents, and that's one of their constructed goals, to make sure that she does that. Right? They see that that's what she has as an ability, and they see it as their responsibility to make sure that she fosters that, and they're going to reorganize their family life in order to make that happen. Also, monitoring and responding to deviations and outcomes related to goals. So it's not just making these arrangements so that certain things can happen, but just on a day-to-day basis, families have to kind of keep track of, well, how is Johnny and Janie behaving? What are they doing at school? Are they getting into trouble? Are they doing their homework? So these tasks that have to be done also have to be monitored, and they have to be regulated. Corrections have to be made to make sure that things are getting done. Well, why aren't you doing your homework? Well, because something's happening at school. Well, how can we make life easier so that you don't have those things happening that keeping you from doing it? You make adjustments. Okay? So those are some first order tasks. Then some first order tasks having to do with systemic goals are things like maintaining family themes, group identity, and personal identities. So families always have to make sure that they maintain an image of who they are. And we do this kind of automatically. I mean, we don't sit down and say we're going to be this way. But, you see it in different aspects of what your family does. I grew up in a Catholic family. So we always had these sayings. My mom, the family that prays together stays together. Did you hear that? Things like that, right? So what it is about keeping things together. We adopt rituals. And those rituals become tasks. Every Christmas, this is what we do. You have to go shopping, to buy these presents this particular way. To go to church, you have to come home, you open the present, whatever. All of that ties into sustaining our identity as a family. And so, as we get older, we go home again. And we go home the next year, and we go home the next year, so that we can partake in those rituals. Why? Because it ties us together as a family. It sustains our identity as a family. Other kinds of tasks involve the effective internal and external, maintaining effective and internal and external boundaries. So families always have to make sure they keep people who want parts of them out of their business. They have to they know how to close off the environment, shut the door, right? And you're going to see this really clearly in Crooklyn. Both keeping people out and also sometimes within the family making distinctions. I don't know about you, but my parents never fought in front of me or any of my siblings. They were going to fight, they went into the bedroom and closed the door. Boundary. Now that's a physical boundary. But regardless of where it happened, the point is they didn't do it where we could see it. And so that social boundary is there. When the children here, we don't fight. When they're not here, then we can have it. We can have it out. Okay? That's creating an internal boundary related to the needs of the family to sustain itself as a functioning system, because it's very difficult in a family to have a lack of boundary between the parental subsystem and the sibling subsystem. Families don't operate well when you have adults who have to make decisions for children and then have the children involved in that process without some boundary setting there. Maintenance of physical and emotional needs of members. So what do the families have to do to survive is they have to make sure their members are surviving. Family's not going to work very well if everybody's getting sick all the time. It's not going to accomplish anything. Okay? And those sick members are going to put pressures on other family members to do the tasks that they would have done. They're going to eat up resources that are needed for the family to function properly, be they physically or emotionally kinds of sicknesses. So families with an emotionally distressed member, it's very hard for them to survive. It's a very difficult task. And so what they do is they have to devote lots of their resources to deal with that member's emotional needs. And then finally, maintenance of the emotional climate. Families need to have order and they need to have cohesion. Families can't have disorganization. They can have an order that is flexible, but chaos is a lack of systemness. Chaos means that you're never going to be able to coordinate your actions. People doing whatever they want whenever they want to. And so the group itself, under chaotic conditions, doesn't exist. And then cohesion is the idea of togetherness. Something has to be holding people together. People have to see some interest in participating. They have to see some value in being part of the group. If they don't see a value in being part of the group comes under pressure of disintegrating. They'll just go their separate ways. It's got to be something that causes them to look inward more than they look outward. Second order tasks are related to managing and adapting to change, so changing the family culture and structure to respond to a change environment. And so families generally organize themselves in ways that allow them to go from day to day and to, as they see as best, to accomplish their tasks. But then something might change. And if something changes, they have to be capable of changing the way they're organized in order to adapt to that change in their environment. Someone gets sick. Well, the way we organized to achieve our goals was this person would work and this person would stay home and take care of the kids. Now the person who works gets sick. They can't work. What are we going to do now? Can we reorganize to adapt to the new conditions? That's a second order kind of task. Some families are better able to do that than others. So you could have a family that's really good on the first order tasks. They really have good structure and organization, lots of cohesiveness. They really maintain lots of order. They're very efficient at getting things done. People are generally happy with the way that they're operating as a family group. And then they encounter a catastrophe. Let's say, my sister, as an example, she lost her whole home. Like that. In Hurricane Katrina. She actually watched her house go into the Gulf of Mexico. Fortunately, she got out in time and went up on a hill to a friend's house. But then when she got up there, she watched her house just go out into the ocean. What do you do then? What do you do then? Well, without going into details of my sister's life, you can imagine some families might have been really they might have been the perfect family before that happened, but have no capacity whatsoever to shift the way they did things to adapt to that loss. You'll see it in the movie Ordinary People. Perfect middle class, upper middle class family. 2 sons achieving in school, athletics, swimmers. They went sailing. They had a family life, a beautiful home. Parents who came to visit. Celebrated holidays. Good investments. They were zooming. We'll cut that.
Whoopsie.
They were zooming right along. You'd say, man, that family is functional. They lose their oldest son. Bam, they fall apart. How are they going to adapt? What did they have about them, besides the things that the way they were organized, that allowed them to achieve their goals at the first order level? They needed something else. They need some other kind of dimension to their system functioning that allowed them to then move away from that and develop a new way of interacting with each other. And do they have it or don't they have it? And when we see the movie, we'll talk about that. They actually don't. Yeah.
So is the first order more of like how they kind of interact on like a daily basis and how they go about like kind of everyday things, and then the second order is like how they interact when a major change happens?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you'd have, So, for the first order tasks, it's sort of an after the fact kind of analysis, right? You'd say, well, what are the goals of this family, and how does the way in which they've organized themselves, their patterns of interaction, generated to help them achieve those goals, and are they doing it well? Day to day. Second question is, they have that, but do they also have a characteristics of their interactions that if something came and interrupted their day-to-day life and made the conditions of survival or the conditions of achieving goals changed, do they have other kinds of aspects of their system functioning or structure that allow them to then change and make a successful adaptation? And some families have it and some families don't. Some families, they developed a pattern, it's working, but they can't move out of it. They're usually rigidly structured. And they can't seem to find a way to fix it. They just keep on marching along and hope that it works. Other families, they might have some of that rigidity, but they also have certain elements to their day-to-day interactions, certain kinds of communication patterns, certain kinds of decision-making structures that allow them to then, oh, okay, we understand we're going in this direction, but our conditions of life have changed, and we're capable of reorganizing ourselves. And those are the ones that successfully achieve second-order tasks. So that's the difference. Families are self-monitoring systems. What does that mean? Okay. Families monitor themselves and they monitor their environments. They keep track of things. They watch. So family system monitoring is how close are family members' behaviors to the expected. So the one thing we watch is whether or not the members of the family are acting according to how they are expected or should act. So what are our rules? What are our procedures? Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? Are the dishes getting done? Is food being shopped for? Is the laundry getting done? Is the trash being taken out on the right day, etc.? Okay? Is the homework getting done? Monitoring the children's schoolwork. So is the breadwinner going to work and doing their job properly? So this is family system monitoring. We can keep track of that, and we try to correct it if it gets off, according to the standard patterns. The other is family context monitoring, and this is less about our members meeting their expectations, and it's more about, well, what are the environments around us that might make us necessary for us to fix something or change something. And so this is looking at what are the opportunities, constraints, and resources present in the internal and external environment. So how are we changing? Maybe someone's getting older. Maybe they're becoming more capable of doing more around the house or helping with the family more. Maybe they even need that. We have to be aware of that. We have to be aware what the members are going through in their lives, both in terms of what are the constraints that they're being placed under and what are the opportunities for us as a family to grow and develop and become something better. And it's not just the members, but also what's happening outside. So what's happening with Johnny and Janie at school? What's going on in the school system? How are the children relating to their peers? What's the wife's work environment like? How much stress is being experienced there? What are the particular nature of those stressor events? And families need to keep track of those kinds of things. And without that information, they tend not to work as well. Okay? So they don't really function well without knowing what those contexts are. Because they won't understand each other's behaviors without understanding those contexts. And they won't understand what are possibilities for them in case something goes wrong, how they can adapt better. So if I know what's available in the environment to help families in need, then when I have that particular need, I know where to go. Some families do that better than others. So that's context monitoring. Both the internal context, what's happening in the lives of members, and the external context, what's happening outside the family. Mm-hmm.
Could it be like with the family context monitoring, could it kind of be like a two-way street? Because I know like working in a lot of elementary classrooms, like you see the kids that don't interact with their peers more are the ones that are having like not a good family context at home. So are they kind of like two-way streets, or is it just kind of...
Yeah, and I think that's probably behind the argument that, teachers want families involved in their children's schooling, and part of that involvement is they know more, they're better able to handle that child in the classroom if they're aware of what's going on at home. And the only way they become aware of what's going on with home is if the parents are doing context monitoring.
Okay.
And they're getting involved in the school. And so I think that's what you mean by the two-way street? Yeah. Yeah, so it works both ways. Yeah.
Okay.
Families are self-regulating feedback systems. So when families see that something is wrong or something is better that they might want to achieve, what do they do in reaction to it? How do they make an adjustment? Are they good at that? And that's called feedback. So you monitor, say, oh, this person or this isn't living up to the expectation. What are we going to do? Okay. How do we respond? That's feedback. Two kinds of feedback. The first is what we call negative feedback or deviation dampening. And a deviation dampening system, you see some of these terms, it's kind of weird, right? Do they sound kind of scientific?
Yeah.
They're kind of like electronics and rocket science. Yeah? Well, get used to it.
Okay.
Because that's what this whole perspective comes from. It actually comes from rocket science. The whole family systems perspective was developed after World War II.
Was it like kind of like atoms and stuff? Because I feel like...
Well, some of it is from biology and living organisms and understanding how living organisms adapt and develop, like boundaries. Amoebas have porous or less porous boundaries. But a lot of it is coming from military applications. So how does a self-guiding missile, we see these missiles nowadays, right? You can put them right down a chimney, right? We saw that in the Iraq War. How do they do that? Feedback. The missile constantly checks with radar and sonar where it's located and what the environment looks like. And it's capable of, every time it sees, it has a goal. And every time something pulls it off its goal, it brings it back into line, right? And sometimes it can be catastrophic, right? So you got these great movies, Hunt for Red October. You ever see that movie? No? Oh, it's great. They're hunting for this submarine. And they fire a missile at it, and they're able to swerve just in time, and the missile goes into some rock formation. But the missile, in this case it was a torpedo, is following that submarine. It's tracking it. It's making adjustments to its course based upon the feedback it's getting from its radar, or its sonar in this case. But the feedback system's not fast enough, so when the sub makes a sudden turn, the missile goes forward and hits some other obstacle. Or Independence Day, you see that movie?
Yeah,
what's his Will Smith, right?
Yeah,
He's in that fighter, and the thing's chasing him, and finally he swerves just at the last minute, and it goes in. Well, that's feedback that's not working very quickly, right? Okay, so yeah, a lot of these terms are coming from that development in the world of systemic, I don't know what you'd call it, mechanics or whatever. And some of it's also coming from management systems that were developed in World War II to help us better allocate troops and things of that nature based upon getting information, monitoring, and then having systems that automatically made adjustments based upon the information that came in. Started to think, well, maybe families operate the same way. Or at least maybe we can think about families using the same kind of term and then classify families based upon how well they do kinds of feedback things. And feedback might make a difference in how they adapt and how they achieve their goals. So two concepts that come from this idea that families are self-regulating through feedback. One is negative feedback, and this is deviation dampening. So someone's behavior, given the way in which the family is organized and structured, becomes deviant. It's not meeting the goal. So we have to bring it up to par, otherwise we're not going to achieve our goals. So what do? We enforce some kind of reaction that stops that deviance from happening and causes the behavior to come up to goal. We don't change the goal, we stop the deviance. Okay? And so that's deviation dampening. It creates a system, what we call morphostasis. morphostasis. Oh, that's kind of an oxymoron. Morpho, changing, stasis, not. Morphostasis, not changing. The system keeps on going the way it always has gone, and the deviation is eliminated through some suppression activity. So a great example of this would be how a child who violates the rule that he has to come home by a certain time at night and do his homework. The system then says, oh, he didn't come home, so there's no way we're going to achieve our goal because he's not going to do his homework and he's not going to succeed in school. So what do? We spank him or we ground him or whatever. Or we reward him if he promises to come home the next time, and then we'll give him a reward if he starts conforming. Whichever, whether we punish him or whether we reward him, isn't what's going to make it negative feedback. What's going to make it negative feedback is that the action is intended and results in stopping the deviation. The rule stays in place. You're not changing the rule. You still have to be in by 8 o'clock and then do your homework. Okay? So it's called deviation dampening.
What happens when neither negative or positive feedback works?
Okay, well, be careful. Whether it's a negative or positive reaction doesn't define it as negative or positive feedback.
Okay.
What defines it as negative or positive feedback is whether or not the way of operation, the system of operation changes or doesn't.
Okay, so what if neither of those change?
If there's no change in the normal day operation of family life, then that can only happen by stopping the deviation. So negative feedback always results in an ending of the deviation and a continuation of the existing system as it is.
Okay.
Okay? You can do that in two ways. You could, if the behavior of a member, you could punish them to stop them from doing it again. Or you could give them rewards, stop giving them rewards for conforming. Whichever way, you're not changing the rule. Johnny's still coming home at 8 o'clock, right? That's still negative feedback. You brought the system out of deviation and you've restored the existing patterns that were there, the existing rules. Positive feedback is deviation amplifying. In positive feedback, it results in morphogenesis. So changing into a new structure. And this is usually second order task activity. Instead of focusing on doing things the way we've always done them, we're now going to change the way we do things. Because Johnny's deviation is telling us, because we're also doing context monitoring, that Johnny's in a different stage in his life and he needs more freedom because those peer relationships are also important. Or having involvement in the school is also important. And he can't meet our family rules at the same time and accomplish those tasks that he has to accomplish in those new contexts. And so what we're going to do is we're going to change the rule. Johnny starts coming home late after 8 o'clock. We're going to understand what Johnny's issues are. And we're going to say, oh, I understand. You don't have to come home at 8 o'clock. We're going to increase your bedtime till 10 o'clock. But we're going to work out a new way for you to get your homework done. Okay? What did we just do? We changed our structure. We changed our patterns, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
So that's positive feedback. So the example, negotiating changes in family rules during the transition to adolescence is where positive feedback happens the most in families. And you could almost define a family's problem with an adolescent child as a result of a family trying to deal with the deviations that come about with adolescence, because this kid is no longer a child, it's now something else with a whole new set of needs and constraints and pressures. And if the family tries to make it still conform to its family organization as if it's a child, that kid's going to be in a lot of problems, right? They can't do both. And so they're going to keep on disrupting, and they're going to be punished and brought back in, maybe pulled out of context so that they can't keep them from interacting with their peers or being involved in schools, and they're going to say, it's more important to stay and keep the family as it is. That's going to cause usually problems either for the family, because the kid's going to keep on responding to the pressures and causing more negative feedback, attempts to keep their behaviors in line with the family's needs, or it's going to cause problems for the kid, right? They're going to, I don't know what to do. I can't please both places at the same time. I can't deal with my own physical and emotional needs, psychological needs that are coming about because of all these changes that I'm going through. Kid's going to be a basket case. So what usually happens is that families are really good at monitoring. And they usually understand that children, when they get to be a certain age and they go through certain kinds of physiological changes, kind of know, and they go into high school, they kind of know what the world is like for those children. They understand what the new context is like, what the world of the peers and the school is like, and they understand what the internal dynamics of that kid are going through. And as a result, they make changes in how they operate so that that child who's now an adolescent can have this successful transition. That's an example of positive feedback. We're going to change the system. Why? Well, because we understand that there's new pressures and needs that the child's going under because of their internal dynamics and because of their external environments in which they're interacting on a daily basis. And so we make the change. Fortunately, we do a pretty good job, most families. You know, adolescence used to be called a period of storm and stress, doom and dry. It used to be thought in the turn of the 19th century or turn of the 20th century that the early field of adolescence is all about this. Oh, this turmoil that adolescents are going through. But maybe that was true back then because the world was changing a lot. And families didn't understand the things that their kids were going through in adolescence because the timing of things got all off because of the Industrial Revolution. But today, we've had 100 years of dealing with these kinds of situations, and families have learned. They've started to monitor more and be more sensitive to what the requirements of development are in today's world. And so they're more capable of doing this positive feedback reaction.
Do you think the Industrial Revolution had an impact on because the parents that were having kids went through that adolescent period, so wouldn't they be more sympathetic? Do you think it?
Having gone through it themselves certainly helped. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so over generations, families started to get a better clue, and our culture started to change after the Industrial Revolution. As a society, we put more emphasis on understanding individual development. And we never really understood it before the 20th century. There was no field of adolescence. There was no field of child development before the 20th century. We didn't even think about those things. Kids went from kids to adults when they became pubertal. There was no in between. And so we became much more sensitive to that, and that allowed us to make those kinds of necessary corrections. Not so much concerned about that as we are about the dynamics. What is the difference between negative and positive feedback, at least at this point? Okay? All right, I'm going to stop there because I think we're done. Because we go to 3:50. And so I'll finish this at the start of next time, and we'll move on to the next lecture on the systems perspective. Okay? Any questions? Okay? Good. You feeling uncomfortable with the filming in the classroom setting?
Oh,
This is kind of fun. I like having kids.
yeah. Right.
Okay, good. See you tomorrow.
I do have to talk to you about something, though.
Yeah, same here.
To me about something?
Yes. So Thursday, it will be the only day I'm missing this quarter, but
Okay.
I have a wedding that I have to go
Okay.
to.
No problem.
And so I just won't be able to be here Thursday. But I'll get all my assignments done and everything.
What's Thursday's assignment?
We're doing the discussion that day.
Oh, that's.
I know, the one day I'm gone, I'm like, ooh.
I think that's okay.